Ich wünsche euch schon mal einfach einen schönen guten Abend hier aus München und herzlich willkommen zu unserem Webinar aus der Serie. Wir hatten jetzt einige Webinare, vielleicht sind einige von euch schon mehrmals da gewesen. Mein Name ist Daniela Form, ich kümmere mich um die NSCA hier in Deutschland oder Dach und freue mich heute, den Dr. Simon Overkamp als Gast zu haben, als Referent vom Deutschen Handballbund, Athletiktrainer, Bundestrainer des Deutschen Handballbundes. Und ich glaube, wir switchen auf Englisch, weil wir einige englische Leute hier drin haben. So a very warm welcome for everybody who is joining us from far away. So we're going to switch to English for today. My name is Daniela Font. I'm in charge for the NSCA Germany here. And tonight I have a very precious guest from the Deutsche Handballbund, the German Federation of Handball. So Germany is not only a soccer company, but a soccer country, but also a handball country. And we are very happy to have Dr. Simon Overkamp here today. I think he's going to introduce himself, but he has been one of the very first ones with the CSCS certification in Germany, and we are very happy for that support, but also made a strong career from different sports to the German Handball Federation now. So Simon, I'm going to pass over to you for some valuable content. Thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to be off until we have a question in the end. You can put your comments into the chat. And there's also a Q&A area where you can ask and collect your questions for afterwards. Thank you very much.
Warm welcome from me in Dortmund as well. And I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint presentation here real quick. So hopefully that worked. So this is what we are going to talk about today, velocity-based training, a method of load management and team handball. A little bit about myself. As you heard, I'm Simon Overkamp, born in '85, so got a big birthday coming up here pretty soon. My personal athletic background is used to be a competitive weightlifter and powerlifter, and played some college football. Overall, I spent almost 10 years in the US, not only completing my undergrad and graduate work in the exercise science realm, but also working as a strength and conditioning coach, not only as an athlete during my playing days, but also during the years after, and worked with a variety of sports. Main experience during my time in the US was with football on the college and professional level. Heading back overseas, heading back home to Germany after that. Next stop was the Olympic Training Center in Magdeburg. I spent 7 years there. Mainly worked with track, especially the throwers, swimming, rowing, canoe race, and that was also my first experience with a handball. And during that time, worked on my dissertation along the lines of velocity-based and training, so pretty much what we're going to talk about today. And then made the transition from a sports scientist at the Olympic Training Center to the head of strength and conditioning with the German Handball Federation, and have been doing that since 2023. So this is my third year right now doing that, and been loving it so far. So quick overview about what I'm going to talk to you about today. Throw out a few definitions there. What is load and what is stress, and what's the main difference between the two. Introduce the commonly used options to manage load, especially in the weight room. Add on a few practical cues, applications. How do we actually use VBT? What are good ideas? What's maybe too much? What's not enough? Where we at this point right now. Throw in a couple of my personal experiences working with velocity-based training protocol in there. and would like to finish not only with a sneak peek about my study comparing percentage-based and velocity-based training, which I'm going to talk about the NSCA pre-con in Freiburg, but also allow us sometimes for some Q&A. So like Daniela said, if at any point a question pops up, just type it in the comment or in the question field, and we'll get to that later. So what is load? Load is anything really that's affecting our athlete, whether it be in general or specific, measurable or non-measurable. What I mean is load is not just the weight on the bar, like in our picture here. It could also be a lack of sleep, or load could also be stress at home. Load could also be a lot of playing time. If I'm staying with the handball example, could also be not playing at all, and what does to our mind. So anything that's really having an effect and it's putting stress on our athlete, not just on their bodies, but on their mind as well. And I define stress on precisely that. So the effect, that load that we were talking about, what it actually does to our athletes. And every athlete has a different response to that sort of load, and that results to a different level of stress. And what we're talking about is a stress reservoir. So the capacity to tolerate stress or to still function under stress. And obviously that's going to be different, not just for every athlete, but for every human. So some people tolerate more stress, others stress out quicker than that. So what we're trying to do with our training and what we're trying to do in the weight room is trying to build a stress reservoir that's as big as possible in order to increase the chances for our athlete to still perform when they're feeling stress, and also decrease the risk of injury under the influence of stress. So this is where we get to monitoring. To me, that's the controlling or the control of ongoing processes in training and life in general. And that's not supposed to be the topic of today's presentation, but monitoring that can be as simple as asking our athletes how they're doing and how they're feeling. It doesn't have to be all fancy and using all different kinds of tools and gadgets. It's just knowing what we're putting on our athletes and knowing how they are responding to that. So that, to me, that is monitoring. The principle of homeostasis is being in a similar or in a state that's as close to normal as possible. And that's already putting us in a strange position, because if we're working with high-level athletes, I mean, what's normal to them? Being under pressure is normal. Being under load is normal. So homeostasis is not that easy to come by at a professional stage. If I'm sticking with my example of handball, not only is my goal to achieve homeostasis within the individual athlete, but also with a team. To give you a quick understanding, if we're playing with a men's or women's team, if we're playing a major competition, whether it be in the Olympics, World or European Championship, usually the schedule is 18 games. 9 games within 9 games within 18 days. So we have a match every 48 hours. And obviously it's going to be pretty tricky to maintain homeostasis during that whole time. So I came up with a minimal dosage philosophy. So I'm always thinking, with how little training can my athletes get away without losing a step? So how little training can I use in order to achieve what I want to achieve with that training session or with that training block? And then if we're doing that, or if we're working with athletes over longer periods of time, not only do we have to think about what's acute, so what's having an effect on our athletes right now. So we also have to put that into perspective with the chronic load that they're used to. So what is normal for them? So what is their baseline? We always have to keep the big picture in mind. That's what I'm trying to say. And then what comes to mind when lifting or when working in the weight room is always the two pillars, one being volume, so how many sets, how many reps, but also the intensity. And that can, and I'll get to that in a minute, that can be prescribed in a different kind of way. But the intensity, in my opinion, is very important, and when we're programming or when we're measuring progress. So, because doing a certain amount of reps or a certain volume is the one thing, but the way we prescribe it or the intensity of how we prescribe it is actually what makes the stress for the athlete in the realm of the weight room. So what options do we have to manage load in the weight room? First of all, what comes to mind is a percentage-based kind of training. So pretty much the weight on the bar. And I think everyone's seen this chart or chart somewhere like that. I feel like that's something that's all over the world. Every single weight room has one of those. So what it does is it correlates the number of reps the athlete should be able to achieve until muscular failure, and what it means in relation to percentage of weight to their 1RM, their 1 repetition maximum. So 100% of a 1 repetition maximum should only allow us for 1 complete repetition, and that's very basic, and it has a couple of advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, we don't need any further equipment other than what we need in the weight room or we need in any ways when we're training. But we don't need any software. It's kind of simple and easy to follow along for athletes, especially for more younger athletes or inexperienced athletes, because it kind of leaves most of the responsibility to the coach, and it's easy to program for the coach. So it's easy for me to overload somebody on paper. So this week we're doing 8 reps at 70%. So next week we're doing 8 reps at 75%, and the week after we add 5%. So that's my progressive overload, and that's my progression right there. Well, at least on paper. So with the disadvantages, neither readiness, so my how ready am I to train on this day, nor the fatigue of my athletes are really regarded this way. So like Arnold used to say, 90 pounds are always 90 pounds, but what those 90 pounds, or I think he said 200 pounds, what those 200 pounds actually do to the athletes, we don't really know, because we don't know how they're feeling that day and how ready to train they are that day. So the weight can easily be too heavy or even too light if you're looking at adaptations. So we prescribe the weight, whether it be in a maximal strength influence, in order for our athletes to get stronger. But we don't really know if on that particular day they're actually using a weight that's going to achieve just that. On top of that, using a percentage-based type of training always requires some sort of max strength test, and that comes along with a certain risk of injury, and I'm losing a training session because I'm allocating a time slot there just for me to test whatever exercise I want them to test on that day. And I'm also depending on their readiness or their ability to train or to test on that specific day. And that could be obsolete just a week or a month from there. So what usually is a typical scenarios, we test something in the summer right after season starts or prep starts, and then relying on those numbers that we came up with or that the athletes achieved all the way to winter when we're doing our next test. So that could easily become obsolete when they're training or when they're getting hurt or when they're just fatiguing overall. Another way to manage load is through subjective auto-regulation. So whether it be in RPE or RIR, so rate of perceived exhaustion, or reps in reserve, it's pretty much the same thing. One goes from a scale through 0 to 10, how hard was your lift today, or how hard is your session today, and the other one goes the other way around, going from 0 reps in reserve, so I wouldn't be able to do another rep, to 10 reps in reserve, which is pretty much them asking, was there even weight on the bar at all? That leaves our athletes with more responsibility for their performance, since they can pick their own weight. It could be pretty useful for exercise we don't usually max out on or we don't usually test for. And leaving reps in the tank also has huge benefits in reduction of injuries, or just not an over accumulation of load on our athletes, if you're looking at it from that perspective. A couple of things, whether it be in prejudice, some of them I know from personal experience when doing RPE or RIR. Male athletes usually used to overestimate themselves, which often could be an ego thing, and female athletes tend to rather underestimate themselves and end up being not at a weight that they could have lifted if it would have been prescribed by the coach. Pro is definitely readiness and fatigue are accounted for, since the athletes are using whatever weight they are feeling ready for on that day. I'm a big believer in developing a sense of athletes and responsibility. I want them to be responsible for their own training to a certain degree and for their own progress. Again, we don't need any additional software for that matter. We like we talked about, there's always a certain possibility for the athletes to over or underestimate themselves, and we are depending on the athletes' knowledge of what going all out or leaving reps in the tank actually means. So coming to the actual topic of today, velocity-based training. It's kind of best of both worlds. So it is objective and it is auto-regulative. So it's going to give me a feedback after every rep and every set. A couple of things we need to know when we're talking about VBT. First would be MVT, which is the minimal voluntary threshold, which is nothing but saying this is the speed, or the concentric speed that I need for me to complete a rep. If I'm not reaching that certain speed, and I get to that in a minute, I won't be able to complete my rep. The other thing is MVC, which is a maximal voluntary contraction. It's a max effort. So the athlete's going as hard as he can or as hard as she can. The goal should always be to move the weight as fast as possible. I mean, obviously, that's going to be the goal, whether I'm using VBT, PBT, or an audio-regulative training method. But in this case, I'm getting an immediate feedback if that's actually the case, if they're going as hard as they can. Common misconception with VBT is that it's just teaching the athletes to go fast. But I couldn't be more wrong. So what VBT really is most of all, it's a feedback. So obviously, there's an inverse relationship. The heavier the bar, the slower it's going to move, and vice versa. So the athlete can still be going as hard and as fast as possible. If it's a lot of weight on the bar, the weight's just not going to move as fast. We usually, and that's the table on the left, measure static strength exercises, something like your squat, your bench press, your deadlift, with a mean or an average velocity. And certain traits of strength are compared or are paired with a certain mean velocity, and I'll get to that in a minute. So if you're looking at absolute strength, so our anything 85% plus, if we are looking at a percentage-based scheme, would be slower than 0.5 meters per second. And the realm of speed strength, which would be our power zone, so somewhere in the 40 to 60%. In a percentage-based scheme would be around 1.0 until 1.3 meters per second. This is just a general overview, and obviously things like limb length, strength levels, experience, fatigue, and these things have an effect on the individual velocity ranges. Like I said here a second ago, the percentages always correlate with a certain concentric, in this case, mean velocity or average velocity. And as you can see, for example, the bench press is slower than our squat movements, which has a lot to do with the trajectory of the bar or just the overall distance the bar has to be moved. So the distance from point A to point B is always going to be longer within a squat movement than it is going to be with a bench press movement. So athletes are able to achieve higher velocities. Like we said that static strength movements, so bench, squat, deadlift, are measured through or mean concentric velocity. Anything ballistic or any Olympic lifting or forms of it or derivatives of it are going to be measured with our max or peak velocity. That has something to do with we're teaching our athletes to accelerate all the way through. So we don't really have a point where they slow the bar down, like at the top position with a squat or bench. They have to decelerate again. Part of the reason why we're doing Olympic lifts or ballistic movements, we're not doing that anymore. I know we have the catch position, but the overall benefit and goal from Olympic lifting or using parts of it is teaching the athletes to accelerate through and not having that part of the movement where they decelerate again. So that's why we're looking at the peak velocity. So the velocities are always going to be higher than our average velocities. And if we're looking at our velocity or force velocity curve on the left, we can see that movements that have less distance to travel, like example, a clean pull, are always going to be slower than movements that have a lot of distance to travel. Best example would be our full snatch, where we're using the full extension of not just the extension of the ankles, knees, and hips, but also the arm pull. But also usually people are going to be stronger with a clean pull than they would be with a full snatch. So again, we have our inverse relationship also with Olympic lifting. More weight is going to be moving a little bit slower and vice versa. So pros and cons and overall for VBT. We have an opportunity to kind of precisely prescribe dosage in regard to readiness and fatigue. So the number that's going to pop up, so how fast are they moving, is going to give us an immediate feedback of how the athlete is feeling and doing, how ready to train they are still, and how fatigued they are. And earlier I talked about my philosophy of the minimum dosage. So how much or how little training can I get away with to reach what I want to achieve that day. So if velocity is dropping, I'll get to that in a second, or if they're just not hitting the numbers anymore, that gives me a pretty good idea that I might have already been there and achieved that, and there's no need to accumulate further fatigue at that point. As a coach, I'm still in control. We also have in a competitive situation, not just who can put more weight on the bar, but who's moving faster, and moving faster is oftentimes who's moving more technically sound or more efficiently. It's highly motivational because they're seeing what the other players or the other athletes are doing at that point. And it gives us a pretty good idea, or really a great idea actually, to measure not only volume and intensity, but also to have that third pillar, which is intent. So again, MVC, how hard are they going and how fast are they moving? It comes with the disadvantage of having to accommodate, or with having to provide either an accelerometer, a linear position transducer, or anything that allows us to measure movement or measure speed of movement. And also obviously requires the athletes to understand what MVC, so maximal voluntary contraction, is. So they need to know that they always need to go as hard as possible in order for them to maximize their motor unit recruitment. Quick overview, the three methods of load management, so our RIR or RPE, our percentage, and our velocity. they all overlap and they're all doing the same thing. And one's going to be more precise, and one's going to be more in sync with what I'm seeing that day, and the other is going to be more of an overall overview. But just as a take home, they all interact and they all measure the same thing. It's just being about more precise and being able to react to what we're seeing on the training floor. As you can see, nowadays, we are able to track pretty much anything that's happening with a bar, or anything that's happening with power output, for that matter, in general. Not just their mean and peak velocity, like we talked about with our static lifts or with our Olympic lifts, but also their power output. And I mean, when I break it down, it really comes to that: how much power are they putting out, or how much horsepower are we talking about? That's the main reason why we're actually going in the weight room and training there for our athletes, for their main sport in general. What's the rate of force development? So how quick are they able to get their horsepower down in their field of play? What's the velocity drop off? So that gives us a pretty good idea. Of how fatigued they are, and like I said, have we reached our training goal for the day? So how are we going to do that in a team setting? If I'm setting up for a team, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, especially when first introducing VBT to a team. Comes down to first choosing a device, and nowadays there's a variety of different devices that we can use. And whatever I'm picking, and I'm not gonna turn this into a commercial presentation, so I'm not gonna name any of them. There's a variety of them out there. Whatever I'm picking, I need to guarantee I get as accurate feedback as possible. The better ones always give us an option to calibrate between sets and between training sessions, so we get into as close as comparable circumstances as possible. Next step would be to teach our players, and especially our leaders, so the most influential players or athletes within a team or within a group. And then I also need to be mindful to not have VBT be an island. So I need to be able to integrate it in my training. So whatever we're using to track training or to prescribe training, whether it be in Team Builder, Sideline XPS, Train Heroic, there's also a bunch of them out there. We need to be able to incorporate that VBT. So the athletes need to know what exercises they're actually being measured on, and how we're gonna integrate that into our entire training system. And I also wrote down the 3 biggest bangs for our buck without getting too scientific here. We talked about readiness and fatigue being the main drivers of not just the training session, but actually of the entire season. And while we're training, we're getting a very easy opportunity to monitor what's actually happening there. And it also gives us the opportunity to compare what they're doing when they're training, how fast or how powerful they are, to how they are subjectively are feeling. Maybe they told me, hey, everything's fine, they're doing well, but the bar speed is telling me something else. And that gives us a great opportunity to talk to our athletes again. Second point would be VBT massively enhances training intent. So if I'm getting feedback, or if my athletes are getting feedback and they see that the competition or the training partner is faster than them, that's not just gonna be a motivation for them to go harder, to go faster, but it's also gonna drive competition. And oftentimes it's pretty self-explanatory. I make it within a handball team. I make it accessible for everybody, so everybody knows what the others are doing. And all I'm really doing is stir the pot and trying to keep them competitive and have them battle it out, and trying to maximize the power output of that session. Like I said, it's not just training that we're monitoring and that we're trying to intensify. VBT also gives us the opportunity to pretty much get rid of 1RM testings. So we don't have to really have a testing day. So all you really need to do is clip the measuring device on our bar, see how fast they're moving, and it's going to estimate that from that inverse load velocity relationship. It's going to give us an estimated 1RM, and it's also going to be particularly for that day and going to be much more accurate than doing one testing session in the summer and then another one in the winter. I'm gonna add two more examples of what I'm using with my handball teams in terms of VBT. Number one being force velocity profiling. We learned that certain exercises equate to certain ranges of velocity, and like we talked about, that could be somewhat broad or somewhat not specific, since we have, especially with handball, we have guys that are 2 meters, 2.10 meters, and we have guys that are half a meter shorter. So all different types of athletes that we have. Sometimes it's kind of hard to squeeze them all within those velocity ranges, since bar speed has a lot to do with the distance the bar travels. So the way force velocity profiling works is, I have the example of a lower body vertical test here, which is pretty much a non-loaded and loaded jump. In this example, the athlete jumps with a bar on his back. So first of all, he does a regular squat jump with just his body weight, and then he has one more with 20% extra weight, so which is 20% of his own body weight, 40% of his own body weight, 60% of his own body weight, and 80% of his own body weight. So that gives us 5 jumps. And obviously, the heavier the load on the bar, the less or the lower his jump height or his velocity is gonna be. And if we're looking at the bottom right corner, force velocity curve or force velocity line for that matter, it's hardly ever going to be at 100%. So there's always going to be some sort of imbalance or some sort of deficiency. So if we're looking at something, force velocity is higher, so higher than 100%, then velocity is going to be the issue. And if it's going to be lower than 100%, maximal force is going to be a deficiency. So one of the two is always going to be deficient, and that gives us a great opportunity to actually compensate for that or to actually train for that. So an athlete that lacks force obviously needs more training for force, so needs more maximal strength. And an athlete who lacks velocity obviously is going to need more speed and more speed strength or strength speed training or ballistic exercises or anything along those lines. Same we can do if we sprint and look at different distances or added weight for a horizontal profile. And same we can do for upper body, for example, bench press or bench throw, to see if an athlete lacks force or velocity within the upper body. And like I said like I said earlier, we have all sorts of different imbalances. So the bigger the imbalance is towards either force or velocity, the higher the deficit is, and the more training time we need to allocate to develop that specific quality. And not only can we test or monitor for that, we can also prescribe training in season. So what I did here is show you an example of how I use velocity loss for measurement or for training application. So Monday being further away from the match day on Saturday is going to be the heavier day. So, and I'm going to do that not just by prescribing heavier weight, but by allowing for more of a velocity loss. So 30% velocity loss within a max training session is for them to be allowing them to be extremely slow and still not cutting them off. And if you're looking at Wednesday or specifically Thursday, a 10% velocity loss, if for whatever range I prescribed, is really not much at all. So I really want them fresh, and there's not going to be a lot of reps until they drop under that 10% velocity loss. To sum it all up, first of all, find the right option of load management in the weight room for whatever your personal context are. So know your athletes, what's the best fit for them. Maybe talk to your athletes. And if it's not just the time yet, or especially your influential athletes, you don't get buy-in from them. It's just not the time for VBT at that point. Once you make the decision to go for VBT, which I obviously highly recommend, you need to find the right setup. We need to find the right measurement system. We need to find ways for them to compete. And it's allowed to combine those methods. So maybe it's just one exercise within my whole training program that I want to measure. And maybe it's I measure, but I still prescribe percentages, but I measure and then have them cut off if it drops too low. So there are countless possibilities to combine those variations or those options of load management. And then that's probably the biggest one here. We need to know as coaches the difference between load and stress, because a training program is very easily written, and it oftentimes is only worth as much as the piece of paper is written on. More importantly, it's what stress and knowing what actually our training does to our athlete and what kind of stress it results in. And like I promised at the beginning, it's a quick sneak peek of what I'll be talking about in Freiburg at the end of September. What I did is I worked with a professional handball team at that point in time, and I wanted to know what way of load management, percentage-based training or velocity-based training yielded the better results. So we did a cross-study design. Group A did 6 weeks of max strength training within a percentage range from 85 to 95% of their 1 repetition maximum. And Group B, velocity group, did the same thing, but not with a percentage prescribed to them beforehand, but with a cutoff velocity or with a velocity range for that day. And then did the same thing with power training, 45 to 65% for the percentage group, and 0.8 to 1.0 meters per second for the velocity group as a cutoff measurement. And then I compared the 2 groups with a variety of field tests that highly correlate to the sport of handball. So they squatted, they benched, they sprinted, they jumped, and of course they did a throwing velocity test as well. And they added a variety of monitoring parameters over the course of my study, and some very interesting results came along with that. And so far, thank you, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
There we go. So, yeah. So thank you, first of all, very much, Simon. And thank you very much also for the Handball Federation to have you in here talk and for providing these insights and pictures. We're going to share the recordings afterwards. So we're going to work on them. And if some people want to have some recordings, yes. Also for our CSCS in here, you can get the CEUs for this. So just put a request to office@nsca.de. This is as commercial as it gets. So now we get to the questions. If you look to the Q&A area, there's quite some questions. Simon, do you want to read your own, or do you want me to accommodate this? How do you measure and determine readiness? This was the first question. So we go one by one, I think.
Yep. I determine readiness pretty much training. So they're warming up. I have a certain warm up scheme. So what would correlate to a certain percentage, and I have their baseline, so I know what numbers they should hit. And then I'm looking at standard deviations for that matter. And if they are further off than 2 standard deviations, something is off, and I need to customize their training. So whatever main lift that is that day is my readiness. Dani, I think you're mute.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah. Then the second question, does it still make sense to determine the 1 a.m.? I think you answered this a little bit, but in the preseason preparation,
at this point in my career, I'd say it's completely obsolete. So to me, it doesn't make sense, and all I'm working with is the force velocity profile and an estimated 1 RM.
Yeah, there's a question from Pascal. Also, do you recommend a specific device? So this is not commercial, but what are you working with? Okay, I think we can say this.
I'm working with eNote, which used to be VMAX Pro. It's a German company. I was involved with the development of the measuring device, so I know what I'm using, and I know what AI is behind it to estimate the 1 RM. So that's what I'm using, and that's what I would recommend. So eNote.
Yeah, okay, and thank you. And how do you determine exercises used in training, especially between the games? Do you even do strength training between the games in handball?
We do strength training between the games. They all do some sort of squat. They don't all back squat, some front squat, some do a unilateral exercise. They all do one sort of upper body pressing movement, and they all do some sort of upper body pull movement. So it's very individual and really depending on what their biomechanical preposition is, so long femur, short femur, and just their ability to safely load themselves or load their spine within their movement. So that would be my way of answering that.
Well, did you maybe? I think it would be interesting for so many people here if you've just been at the Olympics. So what does a day look like when you have this tournament?
It really comes down to what time the game is or what time the competition is. Usually it's somewhere around 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. is where most of the times, due to whatever TV requirement has been made. We usually start our day. They get to sleep in with me, which they enjoy, and then we do team event as an activation. So that could be something cognitive or coordinative. There usually is some sort of speed strength involved. There's some core involved. There's some mobility involved. So I want them to do something as a team, and I want them to do something that gets them hyped up for the first time during that day. So that's what we usually start our competition days with, and then we try to have as much as a routine as possible. So food during breakfast, lunch, and then a snack or dinner is usually things that they know and that they like, and they are okayed by our nutritionist. There's usually right before lunch, there's some sort of video preparation, not just tactical, but also some sort of motivational thing. We usually have one of the players prepare something, what the game means for him or her, and what's maybe oftentimes it's somebody that has some sort of relationship with the opponent, or certain importance of the day. So we trying to get them as responsible as possible. And then our warm up before the game is also pretty coordinated. So they get 5 to 10 minutes of individual exercises based on their needs, and then we do something to as a team in terms of a ramp protocol, so raise the heart rate, mobilize, stabilize, and then potentiate. That they are aware of, and that also gets them at 100%. So they have they do sprints, they do jumps, and there's also going to be a physical contact between them, because that's the demand of the game. I hope that gives a general idea of what we're doing on game day.
Cool, very good. Thank you. It's always good to get some real insights too. So there's some more question here regarding force development profiling. Do you use tweak training adaptations and focus depending on the position? Example for wiggers, need more power center, more strengths?
I don't do as much as like a position specific exercises. More like I said, I want to find exercises that they are capable of doing and safely capable of doing. So I don't, as far as testing goes, I try to have it as standardized for them as possible. And then as far as the training goes, there's obviously like the guys, the heavier guys, or the pivots, or the players that see more physical contact, they need to be prepped for that. So oftentimes have them the likelihood of them doing something on both legs, so bilateral strength exercises is higher than for example with a winger that needs more speed. So it's not so much just the exercise, but the winger is going to be doing more unilateral stuff, and not as much hypertrophy is needed, because I still want them to be fast. So it's either max strength for them or strength speed strength. And then the goalie position is a whole nother beast in itself. So they do a lot of lateral stuff. Speed strength is important for them. Core is important for them. And a key player for them is eccentric training, because they don't have the physical contact, but they get hit by balls that are sometimes as fast as 150 kilometers an hour. So I want their joints to be prepped for that. So that's as position specific as I'm working.
Thank you. How do you measure throwing velocity, if you do so?
Mm-hmm. We have a setup where we try to do it as standardized, or with as little degrees of freedom as possible. So they're throwing from 9 meters out. Their foot has contact with a bench, so the foot's not moving. Then we are measuring it with 4 different speed guns, one from the back, one from the front, one from the left, and one from the right. And then usually we go with 3 or sometimes 5 throws, and then go with the average from that. So that's our setup for measuring throwing velocity.
Thank you. There was a question from Nick, and I think we're pretty much at the coming up last questions. So how can I calculate the velocity zones for my athletes, individual in relation to specific exercises, which is a little bit what you just commented?
Yeah, so we have to do an individual force velocity profile to determine what's baseline and what their range is. There's no way around it. In the literature, I think 2 of my slides show that there's an estimation, but if I have the opportunity, I want to customize as much as possible.
Maybe a short question. How many measurement units do you need for a team of 12?
4.
Right. That's good. Okay, so I think there was one more question from Miguel. If you combine the methods with, I think he's picking on the 1am still. If you combine them for single joint exercises, would you use 1am?
I wouldn't use 1RMs for single joint exercises. And for single joint exercises, I also wouldn't measure velocity. So I'd give it an RIR or an RPE for that matter.
Okay, and then I think it was last question. So how often are they doing strength training in a week while playoffs?
Kind of depends on the schedule in terms of how we're traveling. If I'm going with let's say 2 matches a week, 1 home and away, it's usually two sessions. 2 sessions for that. So I'm looking at match day -2. So if the first game is on Wednesday, first lift is going to be on Monday, and second game is going to be on Sunday. Then lift number 2 is going to be on Thursday, depending if it's home or away. If it's away, it's Thursday, and if it's home, it's a Friday to accommodate for the travel day.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's becoming later in the evening. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Simon Overkamp, for being here. And also, yeah, if you want to join us, of course, I invite you still to the ICST pre-conference, which is on the 23rd of September. We're going to have not only Dr. Simon Overkamp, but also Timothy Zuckermehl, who was on here on a webinar. We're going to have Max Stone, a very legendary coach from the US, speaking there, with her husband, Michael Stone, being present. So there's a networking. You can ask tons of questions, and I'm looking forward to the exchange, and I hope some of you are going to be there. We have a summer sale, so if you want to join us, it's 150%, 150 euro off. I put it in the chat, and we're going to check out our Instagram we always try to give you best price, and we are really looking forward to give you more information about strength and conditioning. So thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us here. We're going to have on the 4th of September a webinar with Sir Cliff Savoy. And he's going to talk about assessment. So it's going to continue. Thank you so much. I wish a good evening for everybody and say bye-bye. Dankeschön, schönen Abend.